We demand the law, the right to relief, which is the poor man's plunder. To obtain this right, we also should be voters and legislators in order that we may organize beggary on a grand scale for our own classes, as you have organized protection on a grand scale for your own class. Saturday, June 15th, 2024, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. We're going to continue the reading of the law today. We started last week. We did a part 1. This is going to be part 2, and I'm going to be doing it every Saturday until we finish this book. We're going to basically look at the ills of collectivism and the assault on individual rights, because that's what's going on in the world. Before we continue, just wanted to read a quote from Norm Franz about gold, silver, barter, and what we use today, the so-called fiat money or fiat currency. He said the following: "Gold is the money of kings, silver is the money of gentlemen, barter is the money of peasants, but debt is the money of slaves." And I think he meant not just being in debt, but using debt instruments as money, saving in that debt instrument. And that's why I've been warning people about this for almost 10 years now on this channel. And that's why I have a couple of affiliates, precious metals affiliates. So if you're thinking of adding on to your inventory of the money of kings or the money of gentlemen, check the description of this video. I'm affiliated with Miles Franklin in the United States and Gold Investments here in the UK. And they always have some specials on that you can use to get a good deal. And let's get to work now. Let's get to the law and where we left off last week. So we're on page 9 now. The fate of nonconformists. If you suggest a doubt as to the morality of these institutions, it is boldly said, you are a dangerous innovator, a utopian, a theorist, a subversive. You would shatter the foundation upon which society rests. And for those of you who are listening to this for the first time, go back and listen to part 1 and you will see where we are. Anyway, let's continue. If you lecture upon morality or upon political science, there will be found official organizations petitioning the government in this vein of thought. That science no longer be taught exclusively from the point of view of free trade, of liberty, of property, and of justice. As has been the case until now, but also in the future, science is to be especially taught from the viewpoint of the facts and laws that regulate French industry, facts and laws which are contrary to liberty, property, and justice. That in government-endowed teaching positions, the professor rigorously refrained from endangering in the slightest degree the respect due to the laws now in force. Thus, if there exists a law which sanctions slavery or monopoly, oppression or robbery in any form whatever, it must not be mentioned. For how can it be mentioned without damaging the respect which it inspires? Still further, morality and political economy must be taught from the point of view of this law, from the supposition that it must be a just law merely because it's a law. Another effect of this tragic perversion of the law is that it gives an exaggerated importance to political passions and conflicts, and to politics in general. I could prove this assertion in 1,000 ways, but by way of illustration, I shall limit myself to a subject that has lately occupied the minds of every one universal suffrage? Who shall judge? The followers of Rousseau's school of thought, who consider themselves far advanced, but whom I consider 20 centuries behind the times, will not agree with me on this. But universal suffrage, using the word in its strictest sense, is not one of those sacred dogmas which is a crime to examine or doubt. In fact, serious objections may be made to universal suffrage. In the first place, the word universal conceals a gross fallacy. For example, there are 36 million people in France. Thus, to make the right of suffrage universal, there should be 36 million voters. But the most extended system permits only 9 million people to vote. 3 persons out of 4 are excluded. And more than this, they are excluded by the 4th. This 4th person advances the principle of incapacity as his reason for excluding the others. Universal suffrage means then universal suffrage for those who are capable. But there remains a question of fact. Who is capable? Are minors, females, insane persons, and persons who have committed certain major crimes the only ones to be determined incapable? The reason why voting is restricted. A closer examination of the subject shows us the motive which causes the right of suffrage to be based upon the supposition of incapacity. The motive is that the elector or voter does not exercise this right for himself alone, but for everybody. The most extended elective system and the most restricted elective system are alike in this respect. They differ only in respect to what constitutes incapacity. It is not a difference of principle, but merely a difference of degree. If, as the Republicans of our present day Greek and Roman schools of thought pretend, the right of suffrage arrives with one's birth, it would be an injustice for adults to prevent women and children from voting. Why are they prevented? Well, because they are presumed to be incapable. And why is incapacity a motive for exclusion? Because it is not the voter alone who suffers the consequences of his vote, because each vote touches and affects everyone in the entire community, because the people in the community have a right to demand some safeguards concerning the acts upon which their welfare and existence depend. The answer is to restrict the law. I know what might be said in answer to this, what the objections might be, but this is not the place to exhaust a controversy of this nature. I wish merely to observe here that this controversy of universal suffrage, as well as most other political questions which agitates, excites, and overthrows nations, would lose nearly all of its importance if the law had always been what it ought to be. In fact, if law were restricted to protecting all persons, all liberties, and all properties, if law were nothing more than the organized combination of individuals' right to self-defense, if law were the obstacle, the check, the punisher of all oppression and plunder, is it likely that we citizens would then argue much about the extent of the franchise? Under these circumstances, is it likely that the extent of the right to vote would endanger that supreme good, the public peace? Is it likely that the excluded classes would refuse to peaceably await the coming of their right to vote? Is it likely that those who had the right to vote would jealously defend their privilege? If the law were confined to its proper functions, everyone's interest in the law would be the same. Is it not clear that under these circumstances, those who voted could not inconvenience those who did not vote? the fatal idea of legal plunder. But on the other hand, imagine that this fatal principle has been introduced under the pretense of organization, regulation, protection, or encouragement. The law takes property from one person and gives it to another. The law takes the wealth of all and gives it to a few, whether farmers, manufacturers, ship owners, artists, or comedians, or I will add here, bankers and hedge fund managers and private equity. Under these circumstances, then certainly every class will aspire to grasp the law, and logically so. The excluded classes will furiously demand their right to vote and will overthrow society rather than not obtain it. Even beggars and vagabonds will then prove to you that they also have an incontestable title to vote. They will say to you, "We cannot buy wine, tobacco, or salt without paying the tax. And a part of the tax that we pay is given by law in privileges and subsidies to men who are richer than we are. Others use the law to raise the prices of bread, meat, iron, or cloth. Thus, since everyone else uses the law for his own profit, we also would like to use the law for our own profit. We demand the law, the right to relief, which is the poor man's plunder. To obtain this right, we also should be voters and legislators, in other that we may organize beggary on a grand scale for our own classes, as you have organized protection on a grand scale for your own class." Now, don't they tell us beggars that you will act for us, and then tosses, as Mr. Mimerel proposes, 600,000 francs to keep us quiet, like throwing us a bone to gnaw. We have other claims, and any way we wish to bargain for ourselves, as other classes have bargained for themselves. And what can you say to answer that argument? Perverted law causes conflict. As long as it is admitted that the law may be diverted from its true purpose, that it may violate property instead of protecting it, then everyone will want to participate in making the law, either to protect himself against plunder or to use it for plunder. Political questions will always be prejudicial, dominant, and all-absorbing. There will be fighting at the door of the legislative palace, and the struggle within will be no less furious. To know this, it is hardly necessary to examine what transpires in the French and English legislatures. Merely to understand the issue is to know the answer. Is there any need to offer proof that this odious perversion of the law is a perpetual source of hatred and discord, that it tends to destroy society itself? If such proof is needed, look at the United States in 1850. There is no country in the world where the law is kept more within its proper domain, the protection of every person's liberty and property. As a consequence of this, there appears to be no country in the world where the social order rests on a firmer foundation. But even in the United States, there are two issues, and only two, that have always endangered the public peace. Slavery and tariffs are plunder. What are these two issues? They are slavery and tariffs. These are the only two issues where, contrary to the general spirit of the Republic of the United States, law has assumed the character of a plunderer. Slavery is a violation by law of liberty. The protective tariff is a violation by law of property. It is a most remarkable fact that this double legal crime, a sorrowful inheritance from the old world, should be the only issue which can and perhaps will lead to the ruin of the Union. It is indeed impossible to imagine at the very heart of a society a more astounding fact than this. the law has come to be an instrument of injustice. And if this fact brings terrible consequences to the United States, where the proper purpose of the law has been perverted only in the instances of slavery and tariffs, what must be the consequences in Europe, where the perversion of the law is a principle, a system? Two kinds of plunder. Mr. de Montalembert, politician and writer, adopting the thought contained in a famous proclamation by Mr. Carlier, has said, "We must make war against socialism." According to the definition of socialism advanced by Mr. Charles Dupin, he meant we must make war against plunder. But of what plunder was he speaking? For there are two kinds of plunder, legal and illegal. I do not think that illegal plunder, such as theft or swindling, which the Penal Code defines, anticipates, and punishes, can be called socialism. It is not the kind of plunder that systematically threatens the foundations of society. Anyway, the war against this kind of plunder has not waited for the command of these gentlemen. The war against illegal plunder has been fought since the beginning of the world. Long before the revolution of February 1848, long before the appearance of socialism itself, France had provided police, judges, gendarmes, prisons, dungeons, and scaffolds for the purpose of fighting illegal plunder. The law itself conducts this war, and it is my wish and opinion that the law should always maintain this attitude towards plunder. The law defends plunder, but it does not always do this. Sometimes the law defends plunder and participates in it. Thus, the beneficiaries are spared the shame, danger, and scruple which their acts would otherwise involve. Sometimes the law places the whole apparatus of judges, police, prisons, and gendarmes at the service of the plunderers and treats the victim, when he defends himself, as a criminal. In short, there is legal plunder, and it is of this, no doubt, that Mr. Montalembert speaks. The legal plunder may be only an isolated stain among the legislative measures of the people. If so, it is best to wipe it out with a minimum of speeches and denunciations, and in spite of the uproar of the vested interests. How to identify legal plunder. But how is this legal plunder to be identified? Quite simply, see if the law takes from some persons what belongs to them and gives it to other persons to whom it does not belong. See if the law benefits one citizen at the expense of another by doing what the citizen himself cannot do without committing a crime. Then abolish this law without delay, for it is not only an evil itself, but also it is a fertile source for further evils because it invites reprisals. If such a law, which may be an isolated case, is not abolished immediately, it will spread, multiply, and develop into a system. The person who profits from this law will complain bitterly, defending his acquired rights. He will claim that the state is obligated to protect and encourage his particular industry, that this procedure enriches the state because the protected industry is thus able to spend more and pay higher wages to the poor working man. Do not listen to this sophistry by vested interest. The acceptance of these arguments will build legal plunder into a whole system. In fact, this has already occurred. The present-day delusion in an attempt to enrich everyone at the expense of everyone else, to make plunder universal under the pretense of organizing it. Legal plunder has many names. Now legal plunder can be committed in an infinite number of ways. Thus, we have an infinite number of plans for organizing it. Tariffs, protection, benefits, subsidies, encouragements, progressive taxation, public schools, guaranteed jobs, guaranteed profits, minimum wages, a right to relief, a right to the tools of labor, free credit, and so on and so on. All these plans as a whole, with their common aim of legal plunder, constitute socialism. Now, since under this definition, socialism is a body of doctrine, what attack can be made against it other than a war of doctrine? If you find this socialistic doctrine to be false, absurd, and evil, then refute it. And the more false, the more absurd, and the more evil it is, the easier it will be to refute. Above all, if you wish to be strong, begin by rooting out every particle of socialism that may have crept into your legislation. This will be no light task. Socialism is legal plunder. Mr. de Montalembert has been accused of desiring to fight socialism by the use of brute force. He ought to be exonerated from this accusation, for he has plainly said, the war that we must fight against socialism must be in harmony with law, honor, and justice. But why does not Mr. Montalembert see that he has placed himself in a vicious circle? You would use the law to oppose socialism, but it is upon the law that socialism itself relies. Socialists desire to practice legal plunder, not illegal plunder. Socialists, like all other monopolists, desire to make the law their own weapon. And once the law is on the side of socialism, how can it be used against socialism? For when plunder is abetted by the law, it does not fear your courts, your gendarmes, and your prisons. Rather, it may call upon them for help. To prevent this, you would exclude socialism from entering into making of laws. You would prevent socialists from entering the legislative palace. You shall not succeed, I predict, so long as legal plunder continues to be the main business of the legislature. It is illogical, in fact absurd, to assume otherwise. So I'm going to stop here, and next Saturday we'll continue on page 19. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a great weekend. And yes, take care. Bye.